I actually regret that we have to have this hearing to discuss a major pay issue that impacts 17,000 soldiers from one state, from my home state of California. Were it not for the LA Times article in October, Congress would not know the extent of this 12-year-old issue, nor would the issue have been elevated to the Department of Defense. Our understanding after this was first brought to our attention in 2010 was that a process was in place to adjudicate the issue, but 6 years on, we are still trying to fix it. Numerous investigations, audits, and briefings have informed us of how we got to this point. My focus today is to ensure that through the legislation just passed by the House last week as part of the 2017 NDAA, an update from the DoD, that we guarantee that those who should keep their bonuses do so. Enough time without the added burden of having to repay service-related debts that they received in good faith. On another note, since this is his last hearing with us, I want to thank Dr. Heck for his leadership and his dedication to serving our troops, their families, and retirees over the past 2 years as chairman of the subcommittee. It has been a great privilege to work with him, and he will be missed.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Thank you. I now ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate in today's hearing after all subcommittee members have had an opportunity to ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. We are joined today by two panels. The first from the National Guard, the second will be from the Office of Secretary of Defense in the Army. We'll give each witness the opportunity to make opening comments and each subcommittee member an opportunity to question the witnesses. I respectfully ask the witnesses to summarize to the greatest extent possible the high points of your written testimony in no more than 5 minutes. Your complete written statements will be entered into the hearing record. We are joined on panel 1 by Lieutenant General Timothy Kadavi, Director, Army National Guard Bureau, and Major General David Baldwin, Adjutant General of the California National Guard. General Kadavi, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Heck, Ranking Member Davis, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the readiness of Army National Guard personnel matters. On behalf of the Army National Guard, I would like to thank you for your support and commitment to our soldiers, their families, to our veterans, wounded warriors, and those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. For your Army National Guard is today mobilized with more than 11,000 soldiers, both abroad and here at home. Our soldiers are our nation's and our Army's greatest assets and should be treated that way. The subcommittee's interest in recruiting and retention incentives programs is understandable. In 2008, the California National Guard discovered inaccuracies in a number of incentive contracts awarded and launched an investigation in 2010. The investigation revealed that the California Guard's incentive program had been grossly mismanaged, and there were instances of fraud which were discovered. As a result, California took measures to ensure these individuals engaged in the perpetration of fraud were punished. In 2011, the California Incentive Task Force identified more than 17,000 California Army National Guard cases that were potentially linked to the unethical management of the incentives program between 2004 and 2011. In 2011, the California National Guard, with assistance from the National Guard Bureau, established a Soldier Incentive Assistance Center to assist any California National Guard member took numerous steps to improve oversight within our incentives process. In 2010, the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, then General Craig McKinley, ordered a review of all Army National Guard recruiting and retention incentives programs across all states, territories, and the District of Columbia, which found no systemic fraud. In 2012, the Army National Guard completed the fielding of the Guard Incentive Management Systems, known as GIM, again, the District of Columbia, which now provides a centralized oversight program for bonus and incentive payments. In 2016, an external review of the Army by the Army Audit Agency of GIMS validated its effectiveness and found the system substantially improved the controls throughout eligibility, monitoring, and payment phases of the incentive process. State Adjutant Generals have provided annual statements of insurance since 2012, documenting internal controls processes to help prevent similar situations from occurring. Additionally, based upon reviews and assessments of the entire Army National Guard, fraud in the incentives program is not a nationwide problem. In November 2016, the United States Property and Fiscal Officers provided additional assurances while reviewing their state incentive programs that there are no issues outside of what we know to be normal. Currently, Mr. Peter Levine, performing duties as the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, is chairing a cross-functional team with the National Guard Bureau, the United States Army, the Office of Secretary of Defense General Counsel, and the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, DFAS. Affected California Army National Guard members. I understand you will hear from Secretary Levine a little bit later this afternoon. Secretary of Defense Carter's guidance is to adjudicate all cases by July 1st, 2017. The National Guard continues to support the cross-functional team's process to ensure each soldier's case is fairly and equitably reviewed, with due process afforded to each and every soldier. Your questions.
Thank you, General. General Baldwin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ranking Member Davis and the members of the committee. I do, in fact, appreciate very much you taking up this important issue to be able to help our soldiers. As General Cademy mentioned, in 2010, a whistleblower and a very astute auditor uncovered signs of potential fraud within our incentives program in the California National Guard. That resulted in a fairly broad investigation by the Federal Department of Justice that went through the course of 3 years. The governor relieved my predecessor in March of 2011 and recalled me from Afghanistan in April of that year in order to take charge of the what were the problems. We found that there was a complete lack of internal controls, so we instituted an internal control system in order to prevent these problems from happening again, and then we held the leaders accountable that failed to provide the proper oversight or create a command climate. In that, we punished within the California National Guard 61 people, including firing 4 general officers and 2 full colonels. The feds prosecuted 44 soldiers. Some of those prosecutions continue to go on. And several people were put in jail for the fraud that they had committed. But as General Cademy mentioned, we also recognized that there were a lot of soldiers that got caught up in this that through no fault of their own had taken money from the federal government that they were not necessarily due or couldn't document why they did deserve that money. So we established the Soldier Assistance Task Force in 2011 in order to address those problems. Because of the fact that we had found a 91% error rate in the initial audits that we'd done, we were compelled to review every record. There were 17,000 soldiers and about 30,000 records. We were able to get through about 12,000 of the records. Of the 12,000, we found 4,000 soldiers that that we were able to help keep their money to the tune of about $39 million because they had minor errors or problems in their contracts. And I'm very proud of the work that our task force did in order to help those soldiers keep the money that they in fact deserved. Of the remaining soldiers, there were 1,400, only 1,400 that we actually sent to recoupment. Those were soldiers that did not contact our task force for assistance, but also we determined had problems that were probably insurmountable and we couldn't support an appeal. We submitted another 1,200 soldiers that did contact us for appeal because we felt that they, even though there were problems in their contracts or maybe they may not have met the letter of their contract, we felt that they had served honorably and should be able to keep their money. Of those, 400 cases were adjudicated by either the National Guard Bureau or the Army Board for the Correction of Military Records. So 400 soldiers were able to win their appeals, and they were able to keep about $4 million between those 400 soldiers. Another 400 soldiers, even with our endorsement to help them keep their money, unfortunately lost their appeal and have not gotten their money back. They lost about $3.3 million amongst them. And then finally, there's 400 cases that are remaining. We're very encouraged today by the actions of the Congress and the legislation that has gone into the NDAA that we think goes a very long way to help address some of the problems that we face and the frustrations that we face in trying to help our soldiers get through this. We're also very encouraged by the actions that Secretary Carter and his team at OSD have taken in order to increase the bandwidth to be able to adjudicate cases quickly, fairly, and with standards that err on the side of honoring the soldiers in their service and helping them keep their money. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this today.
Thank you, General Baldwin. So my first question is for General Kadavi. Concerning the key recommendations in the U.S. Army Audit Agency's follow-up review that was issued in May of this year, they noted that while NGB had made progress in implementing many of the control procedures outlined in their prior audit, that not all of the internal controls had been put into place. Can you please give us an update as to where NGB is in implementing the final recommended controls as put forward by the V.A.A.?
Yes, Chairman. Thanks for the question.
Can I just ask you to pull that microphone directly, kind of like a rock star?
Right here?
Yeah,
okay.
Okay,
So there were 15 initial recommendations, of which the 2016 Army Auditing Agency follow-up reported that all 15 initial recommendations were being implemented, and then they recommended 4 new additional recommendations, of which one will be fully implemented by the end of this calendar year, by the end of the month of December, and the other 3 will be implemented by the end of this fiscal year. It's about writing software and updating systems to get after that. Particularly, it's related to officer bonuses and Army medical recruitment of experts to make sure we are tracking their contracts as we do with all others.
Right. And I would ask that you keep this subcommittee apprised of the progress in implementing those final 4 controls.
Yeah, we will, Chairman.
And while you noted in your testimony that there was no systemic fraud across the National Guard, has there been a review to look at whether or not there is widespread administrative errors? General Baldwin mentioned 91% error rate in what they reviewed in California. So while there may not be criminal fraud taking place, what about the administrative errors that might be more common across the National Guard enterprise?
So, Chairman, the Chief National Guard Bureau at the time, General Craig McKinley, asked us to do a survey of the other 53 states, territories, and District of Columbia, which began late 2010 and completed 2011. And we did identify some systemic problems, particularly related to lack of oversight, no separations of duties, inadequate training, outdated regulations, lack of manpower, and no overall tracking. But it said no widespread fraud. So we were already working on the GEMS system, and we believe GEMS accounted for most of that as shown through the Army Auditing Agency's follow-on recommendations and where we're at. And I can just give you a quick update. So on average, we do about 16,000 incentive contracts between 2011 and 2015, the latest year. 2016. We do about 1,200 recoupments on average for normal processes, which is about 7%. And you listen to some of the errors that were previously, and we have cut that down significantly. And the majority of those recoupments are for contractual issues when a soldier leaves before the end of their enlistment.
All right, thank you. General Baldwin, you listed some of the other numbers of individuals that were either disciplined or charged. Certainly we have only heard in the open media about the one NCO that seemed to bear the brunt. But can you again just list, for the record, the numbers of individuals other than that one NCO who was incarcerated, whether it be administrative reprimand or other disciplinary procedures?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll start with the cases that were prosecuted by either the feds or in some cases some district attorneys took up the fraud cases. That was 44 soldiers in total. Of those, 26 were prosecuted and found guilty and convicted. There was another 15 or so that are pending. The prosecution is still ongoing, and then the remainder, the cases were either dismissed, which is just a handful. I think it's only 4 that were dismissed or were acquitted. Then on our side, within the military, we have 2 options. We can do UCMJ action, which can include up to including courts-martial or administrative action. We initiated courts-martials on 7 personnel. It was 6 officers and 1 enlisted soldier. Those cases were dismissed by the military judge either for lack of jurisdiction or for lack of evidence. But we did go after 61 people, both on the receiving side, so people that we had evidence that had committed fraud but didn't rise to the threshold that one of the civilian prosecutors would apply the resources to take the case, so we took the case. And then there were also many cases of people that were in the chain of command that we couldn't prove had committed fraud, but as I had mentioned before, were lax in their oversight or established a poor command climate that we took action against. The most common action that we took against the senior leaders was to give a formal reprimand and fire them, officers and 2 colonels.